Morning, everyone. Is it still morning? Yes, it is. I'm Andrea Collins from the Export Department, and the Swindon and Wiltshire Growth Hub asked me to talk about life after Brexit today. We did a rather big EU transition programme on behalf of the Growth Hub earlier this year, so we were delighted to be asked to come back. So we've got quite a short amount of time this morning, so I want to kind of go through the presentation and then allow for questions at the end. So without further ado, in terms of agenda, I was just going to have a quick recap on the impact on trade between the UK and the EU and how that's impacted our trade in both goods and services. We'll run through the EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the kind of constraints that that's placing on UK goods and services based companies. We'll put trading in goods and trading in services under a little bit of scrutiny. And we will mention GB to Northern Ireland trade as well. Any of you that have been watching the press or watching the television recently will notice that it's a huge bone of contention between both parties, and that the UK has unilaterally extended easements that were put in place at the beginning part of the year, and the EU isn't very happy about that. Then looking further afield and further towards the future, we'll take a look at the UK preferential landscape. So, talk a little bit about those trade deals that the UK government has negotiated that have been in the press and what kind of opportunities they present. And then I thought it might be quite good to look at emerging trends and the considerations that they pose. So we've had a bit of a double whammy really in the UK and the EU. We've not just had Brexit, but we've had COVID and a lot of the pain that we're feeling at the moment. It's difficult to determine whether it's Brexit related or COVID related. So we'll just cover off kind of how COVID and Brexit combined have changed the global landscape, if you like, and what that means for opportunities for UK businesses. And then, like I say, we'll cover off with some questions at the end. Okay, so in terms of impact on trade, so I've just pulled this graph from the Office of National Statistics. If you're comparing quarter one 2021 with quarter one 2018, then trade in goods with the EU actually fell by 23.1%, and to a lesser extent with non-EU countries that only decreased by 0.8%. But between the end of last year and the 31st of March this year, total trade in goods with the EU countries, excluding things like precious metals and everything, decreased by more than 20%. While there was a lesser decrease in trading goods with other countries. Now we know, and having been at the heart of EU exit support over the last year to 18 months, we know that there was a lot of stockpiling, bilateral stockpiling of goods in the lead up to the end of the EU transition period. So we could argue that the decreases that we see in quarter one 2021 kind of need to be viewed in the context of the November and December stockpiling last year. In terms of services, now remembering that we operate a trade surplus in services with the EU, the share of total service imports from EU countries has been falling over the last 3 years. And actually, to be honest, the share of total service exports has been falling to the EU as well. Now, again, over the last year, we don't know whether this is an impact of COVID or whether it's Brexit. So service types that are reliant on the movement of people, like, say, travel, transportation, manufacturing, maintenance and repair and so on, they were impacted most by COVID. Rather than through Brexit. So bit of a mixed picture there, but certainly we're seeing a trend of UK companies starting to look beyond the EU in terms of exports and also in terms of global supply. If we look at the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, so you'll remember it was much publicised on Christmas Eve as zero tariffs and zero quotas. And I think the misinterpretation was that this was going to be the same as free circulation of goods as part of the EU bloc. There was going to be no change to how we traded. But the truth is there are significant differences to how we trade with the EU now as opposed to before the end of the transition period. And, obviously, economies globally at the moment face adjustment problems following COVID, but the UK and the EU has been hit hard structurally and disproportionately more so than those other countries, if you like. And the reason is the trade and cooperation agreement, it doesn't create a kind of flat free trade area. It's a very bumpy one, to say the least. And there are a number of problems that have emerged and continue to cause pain. And I've listed just a few of them here. So we've got rules of origin, which if you're trading in goods, you'll be aware of this. So to qualify for tariff-free exports under the trade and cooperation agreement, a minimum share of value added must be produced in either the UK or the EU. So that's what we call bilateral cumulation. But that's just for the purposes of UK and EU trade, not by default with other global FTAs. So when we come on to how the UK's negotiated other free trade agreements in a little while, not all of those free trade agreements will allow UK manufacturers to count EU origin raw materials, if you like, as being of UK origin. So it's caused an issue in that respect. Product marking and product standards. So we're all familiar with the CE mark. It's the mark, the EU mark, that assures that products, conform to stringent safety standards. And the UK has had to create its own, so the UKCA mark. And imports from the UK going into the EU will be very much at the mercy of the EU's acceptance of that mark, and whether they grant that product as being what we call equivalent, so it meets the same standards. Now, if the EU doesn't recognise the UKCA mark as such, then those products exported to the EU will have to respect EU norms, or will have to be double certified, if you like, to obtain the CE mark, and that will have to be done in an EU member state. It can't be done in the UK because the EU doesn't recognise our notified bodies here. So when the government, the whole furor about Brexit was about taking back control, and that led the EU to think that there was going to be regulatory divergence from EU regulation, which some parties in the UK think is too stringent. Then if the UK over time does start to deviate from product safety norms and so on, then that could be to the detriment of UK exports. So it's a big area, and whilst we appreciate that the deadlines have been extended for the UKCA marking and so on, it's still a big issue for UK manufacturing companies. And then customs regulation and VAT. So all goods imported and exported have to respect customs formalities and border controls now. So we're talking about declarations, checks. Obviously VAT, whilst it's zero rated on UK exports, VAT is like a consumption tax, isn't it? But it becomes an import tax that's charged at the EU member state at their standard rate upon clearance in the EU. So it becomes kind of like an import duty. And that VAT can range anywhere from 17% to 27% across the EU member states. They can set their own VAT rates. So that's causing issues. Tariffs, so the Trade and Cooperation Agreement covers blanket provisions really for tariff and quota-free trade. And it provides some very strict conditions, those rules of origin and the type of goods. And if goods don't meet those kind of conditions, then those import tariffs will apply, which obviously for UK exporters means that perhaps their products aren't as competitive in the EU. Customs special procedures. So here we're talking about HMRC authorizations for things like inward processing or outward processing or customs warehousing. They're now required in certain circumstances to avoid what we call the double duty scenario, because our supply chains were so tightly linked with the EU in the past that we could send product backwards and forwards. Now within the confines of the TCA, potentially goods coming back, UK origin goods going out to the EU and coming back into the UK would be subject to duty. So companies are having to get their heads around customs special procedures a lot more than they ever have done before. Adherence to environmental and labour standards. So the UK has committed to maintaining those standards, and they're at the moment they're broadly equivalent to those of the EU, and we've had to do that to avoid what is put down in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, I think, is corrective measures. So that means that either party can impose tariffs on each other if they're seen to diverge from each other's regulatory norms. So things like wages and working conditions can currently be considered equivalent, but regulatory divergence in the medium to long term is actually a risk, and it could impact that UK tariff-free exports to the bloc. So it's something that should be on our risk register. Sanitary and phytosanitary regulations. So that's for, say, the export of plants and live animals and products of animal origin. The TCA failed to achieve equivalence in the trade of animal and plant origin products. So these products are subject to much more scrutiny, much more checks. They have additional procedures placed upon them, such as pre-notifications and certification and so on. And that's causing a lot of pain in the agriculture and agri-food sector at the moment. And although the EU and the UK are monitoring the implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, because we've pushed back our import controls, the EU isn't feeling the same pain as the UK is on its exports right now. So there's no real impetus for both parties to come back to the negotiation table right now. But we're hopeful that some form of equivalence will emerge over the coming months, maybe years. UK companies' exposure to broader EU regulations that apply to third countries. So by default, in the areas that aren't covered within the TCA, the UK is now a third country. So the UK is regarded in the same light as those countries that don't have a preferential trade with the EU, trade agreement with the EU. So therefore it will default to kind of World Trade Organization rules, which are so far away from a free trade agreement. It's unreal. And then finally, tax and VAT rules. So the overhaul of the EU VAT reform for e-commerce, which was launched on the 1st of July, has made, to be honest, B2C sales from the UK more bureaucratic and significantly more costly. So despite what was referred to as the VAT Mutual Assistance Protocol that was negotiated as part of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, some member states, mainly Western European member states, are still insisting that UK companies registering for VAT in the Import One-Stop Shop have to have fiscal representation in that member state. So obviously that comes at a significant additional cost. So they're kind of like the issues that we're still facing. So it's by no means zero tariffs and zero quotas, but things are starting to settle down and find a rhythm. It's just being more problematic and perhaps more costly for traders. I just wanted to put under the spotlight trading in goods. So we should all be getting more and more familiar with what's required. So, you know, we need our EORI numbers. You will by default have a GB EORI number, but you may have a need for an EU EORI number or even an XI EORI number, depending on how you trade with the EU and Northern Ireland. You know that you should be checking your commodity codes. Where you can't find a commodity code that suits your products, we can no longer straightforward ask for a BTI from the EU Commission. We have an equivalent, an ATAR basically. So where we want a custom commodity code for goods to be placed on the UK market, then it's an ATAR. And where we want a custom commodity code for goods to be placed on the EU market, we apply to the Commission for a BTI. Duty and VAT, so we should be getting more used to import duties if goods are being traded and they don't fulfill the requirements under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And we know that import VAT is now required on those goods coming from the EU. But there are lots of deferment mechanisms. There's duty deferment accounts. There's also postponed VAT accounting, which have significant impacts, positive impacts on cash flow, for example. Export documentation has become the norm. So there's import and export declarations, but also those additional documents that have to accompany the goods, like commercial invoices and packing lists and so on. Some goods require pre-notifications and authorizations from certain bodies in the EU and the UK. So again, talking about controlled goods, really. So those goods may be products of animal origin, plant origin, live animals, and so on, some fishery products. And certification and licensing. So certification in the form of export health certificates or phytosanitary certificates, licensing in terms of dual use goods, and so on. And custom simplified procedures. Again, I mentioned them in the previous slide, but it's really important if you're using them, if you're authorized to use something like inward processing, that the correct customs procedure code is reflected on the declaration, because that tells customs authorities whether import duty and VAT is applicable or whether it's been temporarily waived, for example. And rules of origin, hopefully we're getting our heads around some of that. It's all based around the commodity code for your product. Regulatory compliance, this is kind of like an unfolding story, really. We'll see how that develops. At the moment, we're quite closely aligned, but as I said before, there is the opportunity for both parties to diverge over time. And commercial contracts, we should absolutely be incorporating new terms, so to reflect the fact that we're third countries to each other now. We're no longer local companies as part of the same trading bloc. Things like Incoterms should be expressly stated in our commercial contracts, and so on and so forth, and you know, legal jurisdiction that applies, and things like that. Some of the things I wanted to draw to your attention were key dates around import controls. So these have changed recently, just on the 14th of September, I think it was my birthday actually. So full customs declarations and controls are still going to be introduced on the 1st of January, as was previously announced. But safety and security declarations are now not required until the 1st of July. If you're in any doubt as to what some of this means, maybe you're new to export and import and so on, I've got my contact details at the end. If you want to ping me an email, we can go through it. The requirements for pre-notification of sanitary and phytosanitary goods was due to be introduced just the other day on the 1st of October, but that is now being introduced on the 1st of January. So you can see we've pushed back, because essentially COVID has impacted traders, but also COVID's impacted the government, and we're just not ready to implement the kind of import controls that we need to. The new requirements for export health certificates that were due to be introduced on the 1st of October, they've now been pushed back to the 1st of July. And the same goes for phytosanitary certificates. And like I said, those safety and security declarations on imports will be required from the 1st of July rather than the 1st of January. So that applies to both standard goods like clothing and electronics, but also to those controlled goods like excise goods and goods with additional requirements placed on them. You can still defer your import declarations until the 31st of December. As you know, what we've been able to do for the whole of 2021 is we've had up to 6 months to declare our goods, to submit that supplementary declaration to HMRC. 2 mechanisms to do that, obviously, are the entry in declarant's record and also via a simplified declaration, which if you're not authorised for that, then you'd need to be working with a representative that was. For these things, you need your duty deferment account. As I said, the deadline to make that supplementary declaration is 6 months, and you have to amend your VAT estimate on your VAT return. So you'll on your VAT return, as you import the goods, you'll be estimating the VAT, and once you make your supplementary declaration, you'll have to adjust that VAT estimate. So lots to think about, but there's lots of support out there, not least from the Export Department and Chambers and DIT and so on. Moving on to trading and services, just mindful of the time. So what would I want to draw to your attention here, really? I suppose there are different modes of service provision, and you've got, just to run through some of them, you've got cross-border trade, you've got consumption abroad, you've got commercial presence, and you've got movement of natural persons. And it's all kind of about where the service and the customer is in relation to the border. And obviously the single market facilitated the integration of those EU services markets through what we call the country of origin principle. That meant that when a service was supplied cross-border into another member state, the law and rules in the originating country, let's say the UK, were what governed that transaction. Okay, so we saw that. You'll be familiar with passporting. We hear it a lot with financial services. So it was that country of origin principle that facilitates passporting that we hear with financial services and also in broadcasting. But our withdrawal from the single market means that these easements and facilitations now are just lost to us. And now our UK companies are having to navigate the regulation at the individual member state level, which is proving challenging for some. The TCA was really ambitious in a few sectors, such as telecommunications, international maritime transport, and also digital trade. But there were some sectors that just eclipsed it. So audiovisual services and financial services, and that's causing some pain. The TCA goes further than GATS would, so that is kind of WTO trade in services, in terms of the movement of natural persons, but it's never going to replace or replicate the freedoms of the single market. And what we're seeing now is some challenges. We've all read on the news about the shortage of HGV drivers and agricultural workers, which is causing huge problems at harvest time and throughout the food supply chain. That is kind of linked to the TCA favouring the exchange and inflow of high-skilled professionals rather than those lower-skilled people that are so imperative to our economy keeping moving. So, that's partly to blame. Some people have gone home and just with COVID and everything decided not to come back, and it's causing huge challenges at the moment. In terms of business travel, though, and providing services within the EU, essentially we can have 90 days in any 180-day period without getting a visa or work permit. But there are conditions outside of this where a visa or work permit might apply. And the TCA, actually, it's quite interesting. It goes beyond a WTO agreement. So it lays out 5 categories of natural persons. So you'll hear reference to business visitors for establishment purposes, intra-corporate transferees, short-term business visitors, contractual service suppliers, and then independent professionals. But each member state, and there's a really hefty section in the TCA covering how each member state has different entry requirements depending on the category of natural persons, the job they're undertaking, or like the sector that they're operating in, and then the length of stay. So it can be a little bit confusing without somebody to help you navigate it. Mutual recognition of qualifications. There's no automatic mutual recognition of professional qualifications in the TCA, but there is reference to a framework that allows professional bodies to move towards this in the future. So the UK really wanted mutual recognition to be managed at the EU level, but the EU wasn't having any of it. So it's down to local jurisdiction. So it kind of allows for bilateral recognition between regulators and authorised bodies between the UK and another member state, but that could over time just create a really patchwork picture emerging. So in some countries, our qualifications are recognised and cross-border supplies of services are easier to deliver, but in others it's more difficult. To be perfectly honest, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is broadly in line with other FTAs that the EU's negotiated. The EU-Canada agreement never had any mechanism for mutual recognition either. The e-commerce directive, I mentioned earlier that the country of origin principle within the single market enabled UK service providers to operate in any EU country whilst only following relevant rules in the UK. This has posed, the fact that we can't operate like that anymore has posed big problems for the e-commerce sector as well as the audiovisual media services sector, where now those companies are having to navigate and comply with jurisdiction in each member state. Intellectual property, no agreement was reached on the protection and enforcement of GIs, those geographical indications, those signs on products that have specific geographical origin. And the UK has now formed its own GI system. In terms of copyright, the provisions on copyright are a relative reinstatement of the international copyright treaties, which, with maybe 1 or 2 adjustments for EU law. And to be honest, most of those have already entirely been implemented into the UK as well. MOS, or VAT for digital services, UK MOS scheme is no longer operational. So that's that VAT simplification for sales of digital services to consumers. So digital services companies in the UK that are providing services to EU consumers have to register as a non-union taxpayer for EU MOS in a member state of your choice, to be honest. GDPR, big one, thankfully, just before the bridging mechanism expired, so again, right down to the wire, the EU formally adopted adequacy decisions for the UK. So that allows for the ongoing free flow of personal data from the EU to the UK. So all that worry about contractual clauses and EU responsible persons kind of went away overnight. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on a little bit. In terms of Northern Ireland, so Northern Ireland's kind of suspended in what I call a hybrid state. So it's operational within the EU single market for the purpose of goods, but it's also part of the UK customs territory. And again, you'll have read so much in the newspapers and on the news. Essentially, Northern Ireland goods coming to GB have unfettered access, so there's no procedures or anything like that. But GB goods going to Northern Ireland are subject to customs and border controls. So there's a separate EORI number for clearing goods in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, so that's an XI EORI number. Declarations can be managed by the Trader Support Service. So if your Incoterms suggest that you're responsible for clearing goods in Northern Ireland, you can access the Trader Support Service that will make those declarations for you. There may be situations whereby duty is payable in Northern Ireland at the border with GB, and the government's introduced a duty waiver. So Northern Irish companies might be eligible to claim a waiver subject to their de minimis state aid limits. So if you think we've all got de minimis state aid limits of €200,000 over any rolling 3-year tax period. So where import duty falls within that and companies haven't used their state aid allowance, they can offset their import duty against that, which is actually really quite good. The UK Trader Scheme, when you're talking about the flow of GB Northern Ireland goods, what will determine whether duty is payable is whether the goods are at risk of entering the EU from Northern Ireland. And if they are, then they're subject to duty at the EU rate as defined in their tariff. But the UK Trader Scheme is a mechanism for declaring goods as being not at risk. Return goods relief, there might be a situation whereby goods have come from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and back to GB and vice versa, and there's the opportunity to get returned goods relief on that. So you're not paying import duty on goods that have been returned. And customs special procedures, again, are something that are coming to the fore with Northern Irish traders thinking about how they can minimise the impact of these border controls and custom controls between GB and Northern Ireland. And then what's been in the news recently is those movement of goods, sanitary and phytosanitary goods, which would require those pre-notifications with the EU's Traces NT platform and export health certificates and so on. And the UK has recently unilaterally extended those easements for an indefinite period. So it's causing a bit of a furore. Just talking briefly about the UK preferential landscape and opportunities. So as an EU member state, we were party to some 77 fully ratified global FTAs, with a whole host of them in the process being ratified and being negotiated, including China, which would be a massive one given our dependence on Chinese goods on imports. The UK government was kind of on the back foot a bit because we couldn't start trade negotiations until the withdrawal agreement had been signed. So negotiations didn't formally start until early 2020. At the moment, as of July 2021, we've got 38 fully ratified FTAs. We've got 4 bridging mechanisms, or they were previously referred to as continuity agreements, where we continue to trade under what were the previous terms until we can get a fully ratified agreement. And then we have 24 at the provisional application stage. Where we don't have agreements, then trade defaults to WTO terms, and the UK global tariff is applied on imports into the UK. We also have the UK's generalised scheme of preferences. So we departed from the EU scheme, but to be honest, it's a direct replica. The generalised system of preferences is where we agree to either reduce or zero rate the import duty that we pay on goods that come from emerging markets to help boost their industrialization strategy and their exports. We just replicated. So if you were importing from countries that were under the EU scheme, you'll still be able to import under the UK scheme. Notable agreements, I suppose, that have been struck. Switzerland was a good one. They're our 10th largest trading partner, huge services trading partner, and the country has significant purchasing power and is a real leader in innovation. Japan, obviously, there was a huge sigh of relief from the automotive sector because the UK and Japanese supply chains are tightly integrated. Australia was another interesting one quite recently. So secured our trade in cars, pharmaceuticals and Scotch whisky, believe it or not, is a big export from the UK to Australia. And then Singapore, huge relief for the business services, financial and insurance services sector. So the preferential trading landscape is emerging. It's obviously a priority. It's going to take some time to replicate what we had as being part of the EU, but we're making good progress. And then finally, the final slide. So I just really wanted to touch on some trends and considerations and what opportunities they provide. And certainly some of the clients that we work with across growth hubs and also our private clients are starting to really capitalize on these. So they're realizing that there's a market outside of the EU, not necessarily scaling back what they do with the EU, but looking to expand their horizons. So sustainability is very much on the agenda. So all over the world, you know, the cost of pollution and the benefits of environmental sustainability are increasingly recognized. So China, some of the Gulf states and India are investing in green energy, on a scale that would have been considered, impossible even just a decade ago. Europe, including the UK, is united on addressing climate change, and the US is coming to the table on that as well with the new Biden administration. Resilience. So doubtful that COVID-19 was on many companies' risk registers, but it certainly should be now. And I had a colleague tell me a couple of months ago that many insurance companies are actually insisting that their clients have formalized business resilience plans before they agree to cover them. Digital transformation. So before the pandemic, I think it's fair to say, while some businesses invested significant time, effort and capital into that digital transformation, others just weren't that concerned about digitalizing their offerings. But COVID has forced these businesses across the globe actually to take really quite radical steps towards adopting technological advancements to secure their business. And the UK is a leading player in digital tech, so the export potential here is huge. Healthcare reform. No doubt that COVID has exposed major gaps in the healthcare systems of, even the most advanced nations, the UK definitely. I suppose moving forward, in order to provide that equitable care, the healthcare industry has to undergo that significant reform. And again, the UK has the opportunity to play a massive part here. Biopharma revolution. So medtech and pharmaceuticals are huge areas for investors globally right now. And the development of the COVID vaccines is just the most compelling example of the potential of what's been referred to, I read the other day, as the bio-revolution. So biomolecules, biosystems, biomachines, and biocomputing. And I suppose through AstraZeneca and companies along its supply chain, the UK's positioned itself at the very heart of that kind of global focus. Supply chains reconfiguring. The COVID pandemic revealed vulnerabilities in the long, complicated supply chains of many companies, where they were at the mercy of, just a single country or even a single factory. If it went dark, could cause major problems. China, if you think about it, is responsible for 18% of the global supply chain, or the global supply rather, and sectors were crippled when COVID hit China. And we're still actually feeling the effects of inflated shipping costs as China starts to try and recover its losses, as it starts to try and bring containers back from countries where they were just abandoned. And we're seeing shipping costs in the UK. Goods coming from China has been 5 and 6 times what they were pre-COVID. Some UK firms have already started to seek suppliers closer to home, or at the very least spread their dependency across a number of suppliers. And then finally, portfolio restructuring. So COVID-19, the crisis provoked dramatic reactions from some industries, some taking off, some suffering badly. And the effect has been to kind of like shake up those historic norms. So we're already seeing, we do some investment work with one of the other LEPs, and we're already seeing through our kind of trusted network of investors that some are looking to make acquisitions at the point, so where they've got healthy balance sheets, they're looking for opportunities to capitalize on those discounted assets and lower valuations. So we're seeing a real shake up of portfolios across the board, but big opportunities for green tech and sustainability businesses. And that's kind of like a whistle-stop tour, Hugh. I'm so sorry. It's such a huge topic to cover in such a short period of time.